I dialed Lena's number with the same nervousness I used to feel before job interviews. My only daughter, my only child, surely she'd pick up and flood the silence of the past few weeks with the kind of laughter I'd been missing. When she finally answered, I smiled through the ache in my chest. "Sweetheart," I began softly, "I was wondering when your wedding will be. I'd love to start getting things ready." There was a pause. Then her voice, sharper than I remembered, cut through the line. "Oh, we already got married yesterday. It was just for special people." For a second, I didn't breathe. Special people. The phone stayed pressed to my ear, but the world went quiet. My eyes moved across the living room, landing on the lavender dress, hanging neatly on the closet door, the one I had bought months ago, picturing myself standing beside her, proud, smiling, radiant. I had spent 3 years paying their rent, stocking their fridge, covering bills, even sending money for emergencies. Every transfer, every late-night call, I told myself, this is love, this is what mothers do. But now, her words were like glass in my chest. I looked at the lavender dress again, remembering how carefully I'd chosen it, how I'd imagined twirling once before the mirror, maybe even crying a little seeing my baby girl walk down the aisle. But now, it just hung there, lifeless, pointless, a symbol of a dream that had quietly died without warning. Memories came flooding in, uninvited. Lena as a child, running into my arms after every thunderstorm, whispering, "You're my favorite person, Mama." Back then, love felt pure, simple, eternal. Now those memories felt like photographs left too long in the sun, faded and brittle. The phone rang again. It was my sister, Mary Ann, calling from Ohio. "So how was the big day?" she asked, her voice bright with excitement. My throat tight. I stared at the lavender dress one more time. "Oh, it was lovely. Just small, just them." I lied. The lie tasted bitter, but the truth was unbearable. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, the ceiling blurring above me as tears soaked the pillow. Every few seconds I heard her voice again, "Special people." Each time, the words carved deeper, hollowing out something in me that I didn't know could still hurt. When morning came, the lavender dress still hung untouched. But something inside me shifted. The grief was still there, but beneath it, a strange spark flickered, a quiet, trembling anger, an emotion I had never allowed myself to feel toward my daughter, and though I didn't know it yet, that tiny spark would change everything. A week passed, though time felt heavier than usual, like the house itself was grieving beside me. The lavender dress still hung behind the closet door, hidden from sight, but impossible to forget. Every time I walked past, I could feel its quiet accusation. "You weren't invited, you were never special." I moved through the days, like a ghost in my own home. Coffee went cold, before I remembered to drink it. Meals sat untouched. The silence, once peaceful, now throbbed like a wound. Then one afternoon, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but when I saw her name, Lena, flashing across the screen, instinct took over before reason could. "Hello?" I said quietly. Her voice trembled, but not from affection, from desperation. "Mom, the rent's overdue. The landlord's threatening us again. You forgot to send the money." I closed my eyes. The words were familiar, like a script we'd performed too many times. I could already hear my past self rushing to fix it, driving through rain, canceling appointments, eating whatever was cheapest so she could eat better. But that version of me, the one who mistook love for servitude, had died the day the lavender dress stayed in the closet. I sat back in my chair, breathing slowly. My hand didn't tremble as I lifted the phone this time. "Lena," I said, my voice calm but steady. "Didn't I tell you? I only help special people." There was a pause so long I could hear her heartbeat through the silence. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking, "don't be cruel." That word, cruel, pierced me, but not enough to make me fold. For the first time, my pain didn't lead to obedience. I took a deep breath. "I have to go," I said, then hung up. For a moment, the house was silent again. But this silence was different, not hollow, not heavy, it was freeing. I sat there for a long while, my hands folded in my lap. The quiet was almost sacred. Then, almost without thinking, I got up and brewed myself a cup of coffee. The smell filled the room, warm and familiar. For years I had made coffee for others, for my husband when he was alive, for guests, for my daughter whenever she visited. But that morning, I made it only for me. It was bitter. And it was perfect. When I looked around my kitchen, small, clean, lived in, I realized it was mine again. Every corner, every dish, every breath belonged to me. Later that evening, I spread old receipts and bank statements across the dining table. The evidence of 3 years of sacrifice stared back. Rent payments, groceries, wire transfers, cash gifts. I picked up my calculator and began adding $500 a month. For rent, 36 months, $18,000. Groceries and utilities, another 12. The number blurred before my eyes. I whispered softly toward the photograph of my late husband David, resting on the shelf nearby. I spent your legacy buying respect that never existed. The shame burned through me, but beneath it was something sharper, cleaner, clarity. The next morning, I walked into the bank, the same one where I had made countless transfers to Lena and her husband. The manager, Mr. Halverson, looked up in surprise. Mrs. Bennett? The usual transfer to your daughter? I met his gaze firmly. No, I said, cancel them. All of them. He hesitated. Are you sure? You've never missed one in 3 years. Yes, I said, signing the papers with steady hands. I've been blind long enough. When I stepped outside, the air felt cooler, sweeter, as though the world itself had been waiting for me to wake up. For the first time in years, my money and my life belonged to me. That evening, I brewed another cup of coffee, turned on some old music, and let the sound fill the quiet. And for the first time since I could remember, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. 3 days passed quietly after I cut them off. The air inside my house felt new, lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled after years of holding their breath. For the first time in a long while, my phone stayed silent. No mom, can you send? No fake sweetness before another request. At first I felt peace. Then, a sliver of worry began to grow. Silence from Lena never lasted. That Friday, as rain drummed softly against the window, I was sorting old photos when I noticed something strange. 3 unfamiliar cars parked in front of my house. My heart quickened. A cold dread crawled up my spine. When I opened the door, there they were. Lena, her husband Adrian, and a man in a gray suit. Mom, Lena said, her voice coated in syrup. We're just worried about you. Adrian's smirk said otherwise. The man stepped forward, briefcase in hand. I'm Mr. Fallon, Mrs. Bennett. I'm here to help manage your financial affairs for a short while. Just a few signatures. He laid a folder on my dining table. My dining table. The same one I used to spread birthday cakes on when Lena was little. Now it was covered in my documents, bank papers, statements, insurance files, as though I was already gone. I stared at the spare keys dangling from Adrian's fingers, the ones I had given them years ago for emergencies. Lena sat down, crossing her legs like she owned the place. It's temporary, Mom. You've been under a lot of stress. This is just to help. Her tone was honey, but her eyes, they were ice. For a second, I felt my old instinct rise, the one that wanted to keep peace, to avoid confrontation, to make everything right. But the lavender dress in the closet flashed in my mind. The words special people echoed like thunder. Something inside me hardened. I picked up the folder, flipped through the papers, then slowly, very deliberately, walked to the trash can and dropped it in. No transition is happening here, I said quietly. Except yours, to the front door. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Adrian's smile disappeared. You're being unreasonable, he said, stepping forward. I'm being awake, I replied, my voice trembling, but steady. Get out. Lena's voice rose, all sweetness gone. Mom, don't be like this. We're trying to help you. Mr. Fallon adjusted his tie nervously. Mrs. Bennett, these are safeguards. I raised my hand to stop him. My peace of mind will return the moment you leave my house. For a tense few seconds, none of them moved. Then, muttering under their breath, they gathered their things. Adrian's hand slammed the door as they left. I stood there, shaking, my breath uneven. Then I locked the door. Every bolt, every chain. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of how close I had come to losing myself. That night, I sat by the window, the rain still whispering outside. My reflection stared back at me, tired, lined, but stronger than it had ever been. I realized something. Their love had never been love. It had been leverage. And if they couldn't control me through affection, they would try through fear. I was because 3 days later, someone came knocking again. And this time, it wasn't my daughter. 3 mornings later, the knock came. Firm, professional, too polite to be friendly. When I opened the door, a woman stood there, clipboard in hand, ID badge pinned neatly to her coat. "Mrs. Bennett?" she asked, her voice formal, but gentle. "I'm Miss Harper, from the Department of Family and Adult Services. We've received a report about your well-being." My stomach sank. I knew exactly who had sent her. "May I come in?" she asked. I nodded, stepping aside. She glanced around as if cataloging everything. The neat living room, the steaming cup of tea, the stack of unpaid bills I hadn't yet sorted. "I've been told you may be struggling to manage your finances," she said softly. "Your daughter, Lena, expressed concern that you've been confused lately." That word, confused, stung more than anything. I had raised that girl, paid for her schooling, fed her, when she was hungry, sat up nights sewing costumes for her plays, and now she was calling me senile. I sat down slowly. "I see," I said. "And what else did she tell you?" Mrs. Harper checked her notes. "That you've been withdrawing large amounts of cash, forgetting transfers, making erratic decisions." I almost laughed. "Erratic decisions? You mean not sending her money anymore?" Mrs. Harper hesitated. She wasn't unkind, just doing her job, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. So I stood, walked to my desk, and pulled out a binder, every receipt, transfer slip, and payment record from the last 3 years. "Here," I said, laying it open in front of her. "Dates, amounts, all my so-called confused transactions." She scanned the pages quietly, her expression shifting from suspicion to surprise, then to something else. Respect. After a moment, she looked up. "You've been supporting them this entire time?" I nodded, without a thank you, without an ounce of gratitude. And the moment I stopped, suddenly, "I'm unfit." She sighed, closed her clipboard, and said softly, "I understand. Don't worry, Mrs. Bennett. I'll make a note of this." When she left, I watched her walk to her car, speaking briefly into her radio before driving away. I thought it was over, but the calm lasted less than a week. The following Friday, a letter arrived in the mail. Official, printed, sealed. Notice of legal petition for financial guardianship, filed by Lena Morrison and Adrian Morrison. I sat there staring at the words, my heart pounding. They were trying to take legal control of everything I owned. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house sounded like betrayal. Every memory replayed in my mind. The birthday gifts, the hospital bills I paid, the times I said yes when I should have said no. But beneath the hurt, something began to burn. Not fear, not sadness, determination. The next morning, I called an old friend, George Parker, a retired lawyer I hadn't spoken to in years. He'd been my husband's closest confidant. "George," I said, my voice steady, "I need your help. My daughter's trying to take what's mine." He was silent for a moment. Then, "I'll be there in an hour." That day we sat at my kitchen table, going over every paper, every transaction, every threat. George looked up, finally, his voice firm. "They don't have a case. You've been too careful, too clear-minded, but we'll need to make this official." He tapped the last page with his pen. "We're going to fight back." I nodded, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the weak one in the story. I felt like someone who'd been underestimated for far too long. And as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I whispered to myself, "They took my kindness for weakness. Now they'll see the difference." The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and nerves. Rows of benches filled the space, strangers whispering, papers shuffling, the echo of heels clicking against marble. I sat quietly beside George, my hands folded in my lap. Across the room, Lena and Adrian whispered to their lawyer, throwing smug glances my way, confident, rehearsed, and certain they'd already won. The judge entered, and silence fell. "All rise," the clerk announced. We stood. When everyone sat again, Lena's lawyer began smoothly, painting a picture of a fragile, confused mother incapable of managing her own affairs. He used words like deterioration, confusion, poor judgment, each one sliced through me, but I didn't flinch. When it was our turn, George stood and cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "my client is not confused. She's been taken advantage of by the very people who claim to protect her." He placed a thick folder on the desk, every receipt, transfer and text message I'd kept over the years. One by one, he laid out the truth: 36 months of rent payments, grocery bills paid by me, not them, cash transfers, temporary loans, never returned, and finally, voice messages, Lena's voice asking for just one more month. The courtroom murmured. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, addressing Lena, "do you deny these transfers came from your mother's account?" Lena's face went pale. I didn't realize, George interrupted sharply, or hoped she wouldn't remember. Her husband tried to intervene, but George slid one last paper across the table, a message Adrian had sent me weeks before the confrontation. "If you don't transfer the money, we'll make sure people know you're not well." The room went silent. The judge turned coldly toward them. "This petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm ordering a formal inquiry into possible financial exploitation of an elder." Lena gasped. Adrian cursed under his breath. Their lawyer sank into his chair. I didn't smile. I just closed my eyes, breathing in the heavy air of justice. Long delayed, but finally served. Outside, cameras clicked, but I kept walking. George placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Mary," he said quietly. "You got your life back." I looked at him, the corners of my mouth lifting slightly. "No," I said. I finally stopped giving it away. When I reached home that evening, the lavender dress still hung behind the closet door. I took it down, folded it carefully, and placed it in a box with a single note, "For special people only." Then, I locked the box and tucked it away, not out of bitterness, but that night, I brewed myself a cup of coffee, opened the window, and watched the city lights flicker like tiny sparks of forgiveness. For the first time in years, I felt completely free, no guilt, no waiting for validation, just me, strong, alive, and whole again. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe, my dear listener.